That idea of very rapid changes is very critical, because like some teams, if you change too much, it breaks them. You have to kind of almost build it in, like be ready for everything to change almost every, like, maybe every day, if not every week. And you have to kind of develop a process around it.
Alrighty, folks, welcome back to Agents of Scale. I am Wade Foster. I'm one of the co-founders, CEO here at Zapier, and this is a show where we go behind the scenes and talk to leaders who are figuring out how to operationalize AI at scale. And today, I'm talking with Ben. Ben's a CTO and at Box, and he spent more than a decade at Box now, helping enterprise store everything. And a lot of that is changing in the age of AI, and I've been pretty impressed with how fast they have sort of been jumping on it and all the learnings that they have been sharing out. So Ben, I am stoked to welcome you to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
To kick it off, I'd love to understand what's different about how Box operates today from when you joined, 10 years ago.
So there's the whole world of how not only using AI, but building for AI has kind of changed everything. For me, one of the key ideas was that in our world of unstructured data, of you mentioned the idea of like storing like files, there was this interesting dynamic that we've kind of been through this, like all of these revolutions in technology over time. It's very interesting to see the data revolution, right? And when I say data revolution, you're probably thinking about, structured data, right? This idea of, data. Most companies today, they'll say that they're data driven and they have all these these interesting technologies, or things like, great technology from Snowflake, from Databricks, from just across the whole industry about using data more effectively. But for many organizations, most of their data is actually unstructured data, right? It's stuff, and our focus on that is the unstructured data within files, within content. And this is a really interesting world because it used to be, like a few years ago, that there's very little you could do to help automate that. And so then when you're talking about unstructured data, you're typically talking about sharing it and collaborating it, and maybe kind of like making it easier for people to kind of see and understand it. But it did take a person to go sit down and see and understand and create these things. And that's kind of all changing now because of the idea of AI. Generative AI was kind of born on the idea of this unstructured data, right? That's kind of how it learned. It's just was able to kind of like figure out like, oh, what would I do in this case if this data, and then be able to that's how these big training sets are kind of all geared around this. And this became very interesting because the AI sort of learned to do what a person might with this unstructured data, and it changed the world of that we operate in Box, because suddenly you could actually automate and you could begin to use AI on unstructured data in ways that it was never before possible. And this was like night and day difference. Like the things we used to do to apply like machine learning style algorithms to your data. I'm gonna get 10 data scientists. We're gonna spend months making these new models, getting training sets of all this data, so that we can do one little thing, like pick this data out of a contract or something like that. Like that has now all changed because now AI kind of inherently understands the data, like kind of like the way people do. And this has changed everything.
So you went right where I was most curious. We've seen this too. Zapier started a little over, 14 years ago, and we're automating it. But to your point, it's almost entirely structured data, what is available here. So this is like, hey, you've got a form and people are filling out these form fields, and then you're mapping those into like a CRM in a very specific particular way. Everything is labeled and structured perfectly. And we struggle with the like big old document, the big old email, the big old blob of text or whatever. Like there's just not much that you could sort of do with that. It's like, well, we had parsers and some of these other things, but they're pretty fragile, and it locked out like entire use cases, entire industries from doing this. And so we have seen, unstructured data become so valuable in the age of AI. I'm curious for you, what were some of the like early customers and those early use cases that you saw that made you go, oh wow, there's a huge opportunity here?
Yeah. No, yeah. And to your point, like I had a customer tell me a couple of days ago, they're like, AI, generative AI makes unstructured data cool again. And I hadn't actually, I'm like, it's always been cool, but yeah, it was interesting to hear that kind of view.
Mm-hmm.
But so one of the first things that we did, so we were over time, we had spent a lot of time in the idea of these like specialized models in the past before generative AI. And then as we saw like GPT-2 style kind of stuff coming on, and it was like, oh, that's interesting. It doesn't, not quite there yet. But then around the same time that ChatGPT became sort of a phenomenon is right around the same time that like the AI became what you would call like enterprise grade production ready, at least in the earliest phases. And so for us, the very first thing that we did was to start to go back to some of the challenges that we've struggled with in the past. In particular, like things like structuring unstructured information, the idea of taking something like a contract or taking like a project proposal or taking like a digital asset and like an image or whatever, and starting to say, what can you pull out some key attributes of this? Because there's many aspects of content in the world that we live in where the content is the key thing, right? Like, this is the contract, right? All the words matter. But there's a lot of data about that you care about. Who signed it? When did they sign it? What are the key terms? And all these different aspects of it. And this is across like almost all file types, all industries, all like sort of lines of business. And so this idea of arbitrary structure, like you ask, I want this structure, almost like here's a table, fill it in of all your content. Like this is very valuable for a lot of these like business processes. So we started there in the very early days, and it was just amazing immediately. You're like, I can't believe that the AI can figure out, I have like 4 different forms or different pieces of data that are very different. But the AI, it's more objective driven. You're like, I want this kind of info. And it's like, I'll figure it out. And it almost works like the way people do, which is that you don't specify to person. If you want to know the effective date, you don't be like, it's in these like pixel square block after this term. You're like, no, it's just like roughly over here and figure it out. Like, so that became something very interesting to do. And then so this idea of structuring unstructured data, we call it data extraction. But then also, for the first time, we just one of the first features we did was almost like a simple RAG-based solution where you basically said, I have a question, and here's a bunch of info. Can you give me the answer? And this is like revolutionarily different. Like instead of saying, find me the file and I'll read it, it's like, no, I have a question and I want some data. I want the info back. If I ask you, like, let's say, you have a bunch of sales material and you're like, do you support AES 256 encryption or something? Like, you don't want it to be like, here's the security 300-page like document. You want it to be like, yes, this product does. It says it right here. And that change has really even today, I still think that not everybody realizes how powerful that the idea of just the retrieval augmented generation style of looking up information versus finding documents is.
Yeah, I mean, and that makes total sense for Box. Like you're sitting on top. Your customers have put, so much content inside of their Box accounts for years and years and years, and now just the ability to ask a question and get an answer back versus sift through. Okay, you got to go through the file structure tree, the folder tree, and then find the file, or maybe to your point, like search will return. Well, it's in one of these 4 files. Like you can click into each of them and see if it was the right one or not. Like that is a pretty incredible. New way to search for an answer. Okay, so that's kind of like the first unlock. Yeah. And I imagine for a lot of your customers, they kind of start there. It's like, okay, great, I can search over stuff. What's the difference from where they start to like where are the best customers? Like what are the best things they're doing with automation, with unstructured data today?
Yeah. So I think one of the really interesting things is the day that you stop talking about AI models and you start talking about AI agents. Like it's a tiny twist because like, there's this like almost like a continuum of what is the difference between like an AI model that like responds to you versus an AI agent that kind of does more complex work. And I'll define my terms just in case there's the agent. There's always like a fun dispute over what an agent is.
What is an agent, right?
Yeah. So I use a definition of an agent is something where the AI is making decisions about when it's done and about how to progress through a workflow. And this is like, that sounds reasonable, but like that's a very critical set of things in there. And I think of it like that the thing that we used to call basic AI model type of single shot responses could actually, in many cases, be considered just kind of like a really simple basic agent in some cases, and that the agent's just deciding when it's done. And so like I'll just give a simple example of like in our first versions of AI, like when we were doing like, I have a question for this document, like, that kind of thing is just simply like, here's, customize a prompt, here's the data, pull out the most important data, and then ask the AI to formulate a response. And then so that's just kind of a basic response. But if you have an agentic version of that, then one of the things the agent does is it says, is this a good enough response? Let me double check. Almost like the way humans would, is like I'm about to give you an answer, but let me just kind of think about it for a second. Let me look through the pages again. And just that simple little loop would then make it agentic in a full way, which is that then the agent decides this is a good enough answer. And so I believe that like almost everything in the enterprise in particular is going to become agentic, because I think this is a really interesting paradigm with the in particular because it's kind of like the way that people work. And so agents become the sort of the vehicle to do more and more complex things. And so to your question about like what is the next generation of what people are interested in, is to use these AI agents not only for like as assistants, helping you do things, helping you do more complex tasks, like in the way that if you had like somebody next to you who was quite smart, and you're like, can you do this? I want you to go look through these 15 documents. I want you to tell me the difference between this contract and this. I want you to like figure out this research proposal and then create a summary of it, but take info from these 3 areas and then create a new version of it. Like that kind of thing, you can do that. But in addition, you can actually have AI start to participate in workflows, which would be like taking the spot where maybe a human would have otherwise had to give their like a very specific, like stop the workflow and wait for a human to do it. And I think this is a very valuable area where you're having agents sort of contributing their intelligence to not just help a person, but then to actually just automate a process.
Yeah, I think the big unlock we've seen is when you can combine that to an automation. So instead of you having to turn to the person and say, hey, can you do this? You can say, hey, anytime this happens, I want you to just keep doing it. Yeah. And so now you don't have to remind them anymore. It can wake up on its own and just perpetually do this task for you, which is incredibly valuable.
Yeah. And I think what I've seen and what I'm excited about is that like, some people ask about like, can you like how much time are you going to save, or how is it going to make like to cut a person out? But I've seen 2 things. Number one is like many of our teams, both internally at Box, in addition to when working with customers, some of the things they're starting on are the things that they the most don't want to do. Like we have like especially if you're like legal teams and like compliance teams and like or anybody has to do a review. Like many times people like it not only does it take a long time, but some people hate it. Like I personally, if somebody sends me something to review, which I have to do quite often, it's often not a pleasant thing. I have to stop and then review a bunch of stuff. And so an interesting idea is to have agents start to do more of this sort of first pass review. Like the idea of going through and saying like, is this something that like there's 45 rules that maybe Ben knows about, or somebody on the legal team or in brand or somebody knows about. Like, can I check those intelligently, like full intelligent level checks of like, does this meet the criteria of how we normally do a blog post? Does this meet is this piece of content okay from a brand perspective, whether it uses the right fonts, it uses the right words, it uses the right like sort of like it's compliant with the kind of way that we talk about our system, and then to have that all of those checks be done automatically, intelligently informed by your content, by your policies, by all this stuff. Like, I think this is a major area. And interestingly, not because it replaces somebody, but because it makes it faster and because you can do more of these things. Like many types of reviews often don't get done. And sometimes that's a big challenge. And I think that this is one kind of prototypical example of something that agents can do for you that will actually help enterprises across the board.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. Like, I think what is lost in the discussion is that, there's a large set of work that is not economically possible today. And that work just doesn't get done. Even though it might be useful, it's just we can't deploy it cost effectively. And now with AI, you can come in and say, oh, there's a new curve of stuff that actually can be economically useful now because it's just a lot cheaper to go out and do that. And so there's a whole bunch of unlocks inside these organizations where we're doing tasks, we're solving more things for our customers that it just wasn't possible before.
Totally.
And that gets lost in the discussion.
Yeah, I think I had this exact thing happen to me a couple last week. We were working with a customer who had gone through and they had like these millions of these like client files that they really wanted to keep track of for all sorts of reasons, including compliance reasons, and look things up. And so they were all different types. This was like a financial institution that had a data and all of these like high-end clients. So we did a job where we went through and had AI in Box like be like, oh, this is this type of file, and this is the key information, this is the client number, and sort of what it's talking about. And so when it was done, they were like, this is amazing, this will help this is, improves the audits, increase our ability to audit things. And we were like, okay, like, hey, let's collect some interesting stats. Like, how much did it save you over how you're going to do it in the past? And their answer was, I never would have done this in the past. Like this is like, yeah, I would have had to hire an army of people to go like paralegals to like, and they would all quit immediately because they hate this job, to go through these millions of documents to do this. And we just never would have done that. And so like suddenly you have this unlock of this ability to like better understand some of your most critical data, but in a way that you like, I mean, if you want to put numbers on it, they could have like, well, it would have cost us this much, but they just like the idea of what's possible now is different in ways that I think enterprises are still trying to understand, even for some of the more basic type use cases. And I think this is like, to your point, this is something that I think more people will start to do over time. And it may not show up in these like headline, like, numbers of like, oh, like how many dollars saved? Like, cause it's actually really weirdly hard to calculate that. But instead they're like, I can work better now than I used to. And then that will just become obvious over time.
I was talking to the person who runs AI for the Portland Trailblazers, and they shared a similar story where they had this process where they were responding to customer complaints from people that had a bad time at the arena for one reason or the other. Yeah. And they struggled to like actually do support for those just because of the staff and the dollars they had on staff. And they implemented a couple AI workflows around that, and they were able to massively improve their response times to that. So much so that they said, hey, I wonder if we could actually do something awesome for the people who had an awesome time at the arena. And they weren't doing that before. Like there's people who loved it, were having amazing experiences, and they wanted to just double down on that and like say, oh, great, glad you had an amazing time. Here's a jersey, or here's a, cool thing or whatever. And so now they've just created this entirely new workflow that like focuses on these others, which in the past it was just like, hey, glad you had a good time. Like, we just don't have any time to like go do anything for you. Yeah.
I think it's a great example where the problem like that when you get those kind of responses should be like, which ones should I respond to? But it was almost not possible for you to ever have like, what could you possibly have done in the past to figure that out? I mean, there's just too many of them to read. So you couldn't even route them. And so, but now with AI, you can, and you can find the ones that are most want to respond to that are good, in addition to bad, in addition to like routing it to the right people. Like, they're totally great.
It's incredible. So I want to back up. One of the things you mentioned is this started to get useful for you at about the time the models became more suitable for enterprise. Yeah. Box is, long focused on serving enterprise clientele. Yeah. What have you all learned around how these large institutions are deploying AI? What is working for them that's maybe different from your typical startup?
Yeah. So it is interesting because the first moment, of course, when AI came out, then it was becoming a production grade, enterprise grade, and of course at Box we wouldn't ever use anything that didn't meet our security and compliance sort of standards. And so when I say like this became ready for enterprise, I mean that like it was like the first moment where you would have the ability to like use one of these models in a way that like. Of course, the data that you give it is controlled in the same way like let's say the data that you give to like AWS or like GCP like it's controlled in a certain way. It's not actually their data. It's like our data. It's our customers' data, and so we need to treat it that way the whole time. Like, and this goes into your operational practices. It goes into your security practices. It goes into like what's available to like learn to do support on. Like even as something as simple as like for enterprise is very different. Like some people ask us like, how do you know that you're like something like, let's say questions and answers or like some of these data is accurate? And we're like, well, our customers tell us like, no, how systematically do you know that? And we're like, well, I mean, we give them the ability to say yes or no, but like we can't look and we can't read and we can't learn and we can't train. Like it's strictly built into the system is to say that, it's not our data. Like we're not allowed to. And then we make that very clear in our contracts and in our operational like procedures so that people can then start to trust it. And the thing is that enterprises even today are still somewhat suspicious of this. They're sort of very aware of the idea that like many consumer like tools will sometimes like by default, it'll be like, yes, of course I'm going to train on your data and I'm going to use it. And then it leads to these concerns that like something confidential or something you didn't want to appear will then be in a future training set. And then in the moment a model knows something, it would be incredibly hard to figure out how to get it out of that model's sort of training knowledge. And so that idea underpinned a lot of people's like lack of trust in AI for a long time. And then what you started to see was that people would go through the process and they learn to adopt it. They learn about not only the normal infrastructure rules about what it takes to do AI securely and safely, but then also the like specifics of AI, like again, like which training set is or isn't available. And then once they kind of get through that, then they then say like, okay, well, how am I going to use this? How am I going to get my people like set up to use it? And here we see things like some of them you just there's a philosophy of like give it to people and have them try it. And I think this is a great philosophy, by the way, which is like people will typically figure out how to use tools better than a top-down version of people. Like, and you can just see that, like, do any survey is like, how many people in the world have used something like ChatGPT? And it's like a very high number. How many people use it this week? A very high number. And so whether it's Gemini or Anthropic or ChatGPT, it's like this important thing. And then how many then use it at work, and the number shrinks down, right? Because they perceive that they're not allowed to, or they haven't been given the mandate to. And I think the more that you make the tools available, then they will figure out ways to do it. We see it with our customers and ourselves is like at some point people do things that you never would have imagined that would have been like a way to use it, like a disruptive technology like this. And I think that's very helpful overall.
Yeah, but you got to think that those folks who like those hands go down, they're using it at work. They're just not saying that they do, right? Like,
I think yes. Although some companies had an initial reaction, which was to go very much out of their way, and I respect them for it. Like, you should never provide your data to anyone that doesn't guarantee to you a bunch of things. And like sure enough, like go to almost any publicly available AI tool and then dig through their settings, and you'll find somewhere that's probably checked by default, which says, I will use your data to learn. And then many of them, they're not, they publish in their terms of service. It's not a secret, and it's a free service for many of them, or they pay for something. But like then you have to uncheck it, and so no corporation would ever be like, I'm okay with people having my data. And so that's why like it's just the data protection rules before you even get to the AI rules that usually would prevent people from wanting to do that. So the more the companies lock it down, the more that like they end up in this world, like you used to call it like shadow IT world, where they're trying to stop people from doing things. But then to the point, like I believe that you want to give people the capabilities integrated with their platforms, usually that they use, like so that you can then protect this kind of stuff going forward. Yeah,
I mean, just sort of good, proper governance that allows people to do it and do it in a way that meets the corporate policies at the end of the day. What has changed inside of Box to enable you all to move fast in this area? What were the like characteristics, the traits, the cultural attributes that really just enabled you all to go fast in this moment in time?
And you're mostly curious about the way we build AI, right? Like how we build
specifically how you build with AI. But also I think you all are fairly good consumers of it as well too. So I'm curious how both sides of that have played out.
So one of the it's very interesting to see that like when you have a company, an enterprise class company that needs to sort of deliver like sort of systematically on a bunch of like enterprise class features, like you see a deliberate like approach to it that has evolved on most companies over time. Like if you're going to like everything we do is like it matters to us. Is it FedRAMP compliant? Is it HIPAA? Is it like just this whole list of things? And to make sure something is truly secure and with all the best practices and compliance and so on, you have a long list of things to do. And sometimes that gets in the way of something that's moving so fast. And so something like so very interestingly, like for something like AI technology, like it changes so fast that it gets in the way of processes that are traditional for like software companies have to deliver to enterprises. So for instance, when we first started using AI, we picked like a vector embedding solution for the database, and we picked some models, and we said, oh, these are like pretty good ones. We'll go with that. And then it was a few months later, we're like, let's reassess. And then we finished that. And then 6 months later, let's reassess. And similar to our agent frameworks. And it's certainly from the models perspective, like what is the frontier-based models is continuing to change over time. And so you find yourself constantly questioning these underlying assumptions that normally would take like once you pick a database, you keep it for a long time, like years usually, or even longer. And so this idea of having to constantly recheck your choices is something that requires like a 2-speed system internally. There's this some things like about the company you don't want to change that fast. It unnecessarily causes problems for people internally or for customers. But for AI, you need to sort of set everything up so that it can constantly change and be reevaluated. And this is a whole new way of working for some people. If you've been in a startup, it seems completely obvious. But if you've been in a large company for a long time, it is like, what do you mean? Like you told me 6 months ago that in 6 months you do, blah. And you're like, well, the world changed dramatically. The competition changed, the technology changed, the paradigms changed, and it's different now. And so you have to constantly be building that into your internal processes, the way you build, the technology choices you make, and then even the philosophies changes sometimes, which is like not normal in my experiences over the last 20 years, is that the idea of what is your strategy is changing more often, I think, for almost every company than like you said, saying, every strategy for last for 5 years, that kind of topic. No, that doesn't make any sense right now for the AI specific stuff.
Yeah. Double click on that. So I've heard you talk about this before, that, companies need to have this multi-speed mode, where you sort of have the fast team and then the stable team. How does that actually get operationalized?
Yeah, I mean, so the important thing is that it's not the cool team and the not cool team, or it's not the important team and the not important team. It's the team that must respond quickly, and then the team that has the ability to plan for longer horizons. And so, so the way that we do it for Box is that we, when we're building something new, we try very hard to make sure that the sprint cycles are shorter. We make sure that that we have more reviews. Sometimes in organizations, we've got many different teams who are building many different really critical things, but some of them you review every quarter, every 6 months, or what's the strategy, any big updates, but progress over time. But with AI, you almost have to do it every week or two, and you have to have almost all of the key stakeholders involved. And to the point, at some point you have to shrink down that number of stakeholders specifically to get work done. Of course at Box, Aaron is our CEO is very involved in a lot of the newest updates, and it's almost interesting. It's we even put people on who sit in certain areas, and so it's you're looking this direction and you're thinking about the traditional way, your day job of making sure that the company runs effectively and so on, and then you kind of turn this way and it's kind of okay, what changed since this morning? Let's nobody knew that this thing was going to happen, and did you see this latest way that this company is releasing this? And then that idea of very rapid changes is very critical, because some teams, if you change too much, it breaks them, and you have to almost prepare the team to say we don't know what we're going to do in a month. Of course we have an idea, but probably it's going to change. You have to kind of almost build it in, be ready for everything to change almost every maybe every day, if not every week. And you have to kind of develop a process around it. But importantly, it's probably not important for the whole, to change everything about your development methodology, because there are certain things that you still want to have reliably predictable, important, in some cases, absolutely critical things that just happen on the quote unquote normal software process.
Yeah. So, I mean, that makes sense to me that you would sort of want to have this fast response team where, I don't know, OpenAI, Anthropic, whatever, they sort of announce some new capability or whatever, and you want to be able to jump on that right away and figure this out. And you want to have on this other side a team that's investing in stable, durable, trusted APIs and infrastructure that folks can rely on. What happens when those two teams meet? What happens in the middle?
So the chaos is in every company that I've ever met, I've ever been involved in, but this is, I think, where so I use the term platform quite a bit, and to me, the reason you do that is so that you develop this idea of almost like a slip area. So you can have pieces of it that are moving reliably, solving for quality, solving for scale, solving for reliability, and then a team that is able to quickly iterate. So one of the things that we do at Box is that we have multi-layers of our platform. So if like we have our traditional platform, our content management, we're doing security and unlimited storage and internal external collaboration and all the stuff. Let me tell you about 20 years of history about all this great stuff, like how many days you have, so I can tell you all the features. And then you have the AI layer, which is the infrastructure AI layer, where it's secure and people, we get our compliance audits on this, and we make sure that it's secure. And then on top of that, we have this agentic AI layer whose job is to change very rapidly. So the idea of like what that agent is doing is something that we consider to be like built on top of this. So there's like a contract between what an agent can do in the system and then what the system can do. Like for something like retrieval augmented generation, where you have to go look up a bunch of data, the piece where you go look up the data, across, we have over an exabyte of data. We have like hundreds of billions of these things. You want that to be extremely permissions aware, secure, like not changing all the time. But then what the agent's going to do with that will change all the time. Like to the point, a new model comes out, it can substantially change what your agents can be able to do. And so then you should almost rewrite it that night, like just to see what happens. And then that idea of like, you could never build the platform again to update it. Like even the process of updating the platform might take longer than the time you want to spend on it. And so you have to have a flexible layer. So in Box, we have the ability to like load and to customize these agents inside the platform so they can do those tests to see like what should we be doing next based on the results of me just trying it out. And I think for every company, you need to have that idea of a platform underneath it, stable, reliable, scale, just a different set of requirements versus the thing that's allowed to change. And the friction you're going to hit, to your question, is if you don't have the right layers, then you're going to end up with like somebody trying to move a giant object and somebody else pushing back on the other side. Like, and then that just never works out well.
Okay, I want to circle back to our discussion on unstructured data again. So you have loads of customers that have lots of unstructured data, but just because it's AI is good at working with unstructured data doesn't necessarily mean that companies who have lots of unstructured data can just like flip a light switch and now, oh great, like we can do all sorts of interesting analysis or workflows or automations on top of that. What are the things that, if say you're in one of these companies where you have just reams of like decades worth of like unstructured data, what are the things that they have to do to actually be ready to go deploy AI and actually get practical value out of it? It probably can't still be sitting in a file folder somewhere in a basement.
Well, yeah. Hopefully, it's in a system that is able to like support the latest AI capabilities, and then which is of course one of the things like. At Box, we think of ourselves as if you're going to be dealing with unstructured content, you better be like keeping up with AI. Otherwise, somebody else is going to do it for you. Like, and so in general, one of the things that I would always recommend is across all of your platforms, like which of your platforms are keeping up with the latest AI? Like not the ones that had like an announcement that they did, a year ago, but like keeping up with all these changes, because that's going to be very important for you, because probably the most value you're going to get out of some of these platforms is going to be the thing that they're about to build tomorrow based on the latest, AI capabilities. But in general, for unstructured data, like one of the challenges is that like there's so much of it and there's this like long history to it that you have to make sure that you're you're able to use it effectively and securely. That's often one of the biggest challenges is like, and sometimes people like, in the first versions of some of the stuff that came out around with from some companies, they were like, look what you can do with your unstructured data. Like if you do this and this wonderful thing happens, but they like didn't take into account the idea that every company has, like every person in every company has access to different things. Like some people are like, oh, I'm going to add role-based access control. And they're like, no, it's not even role-based access control. Like just because you're in marketing doesn't mean that you get to see all marketing stuff. Or just because you're in like, engineering doesn't mean you see all the stuff. At some point, you as a person have access to like a bunch of unstructured data that nobody else does too. So you have to take that into account because you probably want to use all of it. So then you end up in this world where you have to sort of be very aware of the identity and of the permissions associated with that, with the users. And this is really critical. You should never deploy any solution that doesn't have this all like completely checked every one of these boxes, because it like if you're not, the AI is so helpful, and AI, it doesn't keep secrets. It will go find information and tell you about it. And it doesn't know whether or not you're authorized to do it. So you basically cannot have the AI ever look at something that you're not allowed to look at when it's operating on your behalf. And so that's very critical. And then it makes its way into the world where one of the interesting things is to get the data that you have that is, and then begin to provide it to people in a way that's not only make sure that you have the right permissions, but also is authoritative. This is one of the other key pieces of your question, which is there's a lot of data in a lot of organizations, and only some of it is authoritative. And so one of the hard parts about context engineering and about going through this kind of data is to make sure that you have got not just the answer, but the best answer given the data that it has. So a fun thing that we did early on was we took all of our, we were testing out like how well this, idea of looking up information works. We dropped all the financial data we could find at Box into a big, we call a hub or a big folder. And then we basically asked a question and we were like, what was the Q3 revenue? And it came out with an answer. And we were like, oh, like high five. And I can't believe this worked. It's so awesome. And then we looked at it. We're like, wait a minute. That's a little bit wrong. And at first we thought, oh, it must be Q3 like last year or something. No, but it kind of got that part right. But then we looked at it, we found that it had like looked at data from a board deck. And it was like, and so it's quite authoritative, but it wasn't like, it turned out that was like early on before the quarter had closed. And so it should have been looking at the document, which was the official like public report, which was also in there somewhere. And so that kind of thing is really interesting because there's so much context in an organization, and then selecting which is the right one is itself an intelligent task. And it gets worse the more data you have, and it gets worse the more like I'm gonna look at messages, I'm gonna look at emails, I'm gonna look at all your data. And so one thing that we do is we give people the ability to not only curate a set of data, which is often a great way to do it, is to have humans be like, I want you to really care about this set of data, like product material or policies or that kind of thing. And so the AI just naturally only looks at that data. In addition to having the AI try to intelligently figure out if it has conflicting set of data, can it resolve it itself? And usually we also then say, if it can't, just tell all the data. The Q3 revenue is either this, and here are the 7 documents I found it from. So like, which one did you want? Because all of them seem like the answers to your questions.
Yeah, it's got to know that it's not in document final. It's in document final V2. This time I mean it.
It turned. Yeah, that's actually what we learned that exact trick early is that we used to not provide the AI the file name. We just would find the chunk of the data. But then it turned out that oftentimes that conveyed a lot of information. To your point, these days you might, if you gave it one of those draft and file, it would be like, if you ask it a question, it'd be like, well, the one that says final, this is the answer. Just for note that there's other versions and the draft ones that were different. And that kind of thing, I think, is the only way to resolve this kind of challenge. Because even at the smartest human in your company, if you ask them that question, like they might not be able to give you a single legitimate answer. They might often have to give you some extra context.
Well, and you know what's funny is, there's a joke that goes around like one of the hardest things in computer science is naming stuff. And I think humans are just very sloppy with naming things. But AI is actually quite good at this. So if you want to just ask the AI to name your things, like it does a pretty darn good job of naming it in ways that it will recognize down the line.
that we definitely have that challenge in Box is that the challenge of naming, but also using AI wherever possible to help us with reasonable naming structures is helpful.
Yeah. So you said one interesting thing, which was, hey, you got to be working with vendors who are, staying up to date with this stuff. So hidden behind that is clearly some experience in like vendor procurement. And I'm curious, like, for folks who don't work in tech, I mean, or heck, maybe even if you do, like every vendor out there is saying, I'm doing AI, I'm on the front line. It's hard to tell like who actually really is doing this versus who is just putting window dressing on it at this moment in time. So for folks who are out there trying to buy from vendors, like, are there certain things that you're like, hey, here's some tricks that you can use to help you better understand who is likely doing legitimate work here versus who is just trying to surf a wave?
Yeah. I think probably one of the answers would be get 4 presentations from your vendors about their AI strategies, and then you'll probably very quickly figure out which ones are which. Like it's almost one of those just try a few times and you'll get it. But I'd also say, I mean, if you were looking for sort of specifics, I personally believe that like AI agents are a big part of enterprise sort of paradigm that will matter a lot. So people who are talking about their AI and they're telling you about AI agents now and in the future, and you start to see them evolving, I think that's really critical. I think many times you're talking to customers or to vendors, you should see like when they tell you this is what works today. Let me show you. This is what is brand new, and this is what's coming later. And you kind of have to have all 3, because if you only get people telling you later, you're like, I'm not so sure they actually built anything. I'm not sure they solved the hard problems. If they tell you only what they have, you're like, oh, maybe they got stuck, because sometimes if you're not re-architecting constantly, it's a challenge. So I think if you look at ask them which is which, which are the things that are brand new, which are the things that are old, which are old being like a year old, and which of the things are the next generation. This doesn't work. And if you want to give them a hard question, ask them what an agent is, and then see if their answer and rate them on that, because that often would sort of differentiate the people who are either using AI models in their base form, which I think is great. There's no problem there. But versus the ones that are preparing or using currently the idea of the more complex tasks with agents.
Yeah. So there's this you basically just want to see the trend line. Effectively, you want to say hey, I want to see where you started. I want to see where you're at, and I want to see where you're going. And if there actually is a line there, you can say, this is a company actively working on this. Versus if it's just a dot in time, you're like, this is this was a flash in the pan.
Totally, that's a great way to say it.
What are you seeing that is separating the companies that are figuring out this the fastest? What is it about them? Is there certain skills? Is there certain tools? Is there certain cultural attributes? Like, what are the things where you're like, this, if you're doing this, you are in the 1%?
I think for me, it really is all about AI agents, and I think I started saying that maybe 6 months ago or a year ago, and I think I'm going to be saying that for the next couple of years. My mental model of an AI agent is one of where it can do things kind of like a person can do. And so getting to the definition of exactly what that means in your organization and how you're going to use it is a very long and broad set of things that you can do. And so for me, you start to try to figure out what is both the roadmap and what's currently available for companies that do these AI agents. And you start to see some of the really interesting things is to see how a very high-end programmer, who of course is on the forefront of many of these, they have the capacity to handle some of the earliest more complex technical versions of what AI can do, and of course AI being able to program is just one of their fundamental attributes that have sort of always been very amazing. But you start to see that some people are taking any of these newest the best sort of AI code generation tools, and they start to say when they get to work, they become managers of a bunch of agents doing a bunch of work for them. And you see the difference about how people are getting good about this kind of thing. And so, and then as people are doing that, you start to realize there's a difference between a good agent and a less good agent. And so I think people on the forefront of using AI effectively are the ones who have very good context engineering that makes its way into very good agents that basically let you then delegate to them. It's almost we evaluate people this way, they're good, according to this role, they're good at this or good at this. You almost start to need to evaluate agents that way. You're you did the job, but you require a little bit more guidance, and the first version was maybe off. So this is, you don't get promoted yet. That kind of mentality, you start to see this coming out of companies is you're I can't believe that if I asked this thing, this agent was able to do it. That's amazing. Versus another one where it took you so many shots to get it right that it almost maybe I should have just done it myself. That kind of thing is and I think that this idea will go forward across many companies is to see how smart the agents are. It's almost like agents are the new application, and then it's going to matter most to companies how good that agent is. And funny, it might even turn into 100 lines of code, but that 100 lines of code is more important than many other things you're doing.
Yeah, effectively, it's like this. Establishing a rubric and then keeping tedious notes on yes, that was great. No, that was not great. And just keep doing that over and over again. And the humans that are just really diligent about doing that effectively can deploy agents way better than folks who are just I set up a prompt and, it's fine. At the end of the day.
Yeah.
What, let's look ahead a little bit. What are you excited for in the next 6 to 12 months? What are the things that you think are just on the cusp of organizations being able to figure out how to do?
To stay true to my promise from a moment ago, I'm going to say the word AI agents. Yeah, but okay. So but there's multiple flavors of it to make it more. Okay. So AI agents that can do more for you, I think is very critical. The idea where you give them complex tasks and you almost can tell some things you want to answer quickly. I have this piece of information I want, sort of classic retrieval augmented generation, have an agent think about it. Even if it reflects on it, it should give it to you really quickly. But then at some point you want it to do something complex and it's going to take it a while. And this is something that I think, I don't know if everyone's gotten used to it, but people who are on the forefront of AI, thinking modes or reasoning modes, these are something that you start to realize that in the same way with a person, if I said, hey, can you give me the answer to this question? Here you go. I'm can you make me a report that I'm going to give to the board that's going to be completely accurate? They're give me a while. Like, and in that idea, agents have that too. The longer you give them, the more they can do work and the more they can get you really reasonable things. So something like deep research, which was the capability that many model like ChatGPT and Gemini and Anthropic and others that they added a while ago. Deep research on the internet turned out to be something where if you really wanted a good answer, do deep research versus the sort of answer in 10 seconds. And so like we've incorporated agents that do deep research on your content. And then you start to realize that like you can get an answer quickly, but if you want to have research that goes on for a minute, sometimes 10 or 20 minutes, like then giving the AI time to reflect and to look and to understand more things, get a reference, follow up on that reference, and that kind of like loops. Those are really critical for overall making sure that you are getting the best kind of answers. And so then going forward, I think you're going to start to see that like you have these agents helping you. But then, so that's one major aspect, like agents taking longer to do things. So you start to think of yourself as a manager of agents. But the other side of it is agents and workflows. I think some of the really interesting things are when you take the power of these agents and then you put them inside of a workflow. And sometimes these agents can be calling other agents and other systems. But the more that you can have like a workflow go from end to end without stopping, because you along the way you sort of are intelligently to do something that used to require a person to do it, the more that you can probably accelerate a process. And then to the point earlier, you can do this in areas that you just don't do today because it's just too hard or too complex or it bothers people too much. And so I think this is going to be a big part of certainly 6 to 12 months of people using workflows more with agents, with different platforms together to start to automate more of the things that hopefully are delivering like what you call like real business value.
So follow up on that. One of the things we're observing is that, when you put these agents in a workflow, right now, they benefit massively from being constrained inside of workflow where you're sort of predetermined saying, hey, we want you to go from this step to this step to that step. You get a lot of better accuracy, you get better reliability, you get cost advantages, things like that. But I think we're all sort of more excited about this world where the agent can figure out what the next step is, et cetera. What do you think the big unlock is for those to actually work at the reliability that most enterprises need? I think there's some cases where it's working, but by and large, I think that still is not yet solved.
Yeah. I mean, and there's an interesting question of what is an agent versus what is a workflow, right? Because if you look at,
true too,
like what is a good agent? It either has a predefined sense of what it's going to do and it intelligently is progressing through this and making decisions and looping along the way, or it is making its own plan that it just completely or some combination of both. And so that if you looked at what an agent does in many of these more complex cases, it does look like a workflow. And then so there's this question of, well, if I'm using that agent in a workflow, like where does this stop and end? And to me, there's this question of like a deterministic aspect of when something always happens versus when there's something intelligently happening. And this is why I believe in the paradigm where you actually use agents in a workflow. And so you might have an incredibly complex agent that does all these things and intelligently coming through this, but its job is to arrive at a single answer or a single like something to branch upon, and then you use that inside of a workflow. And so given an input, do a lot of interesting things and then come out with an output that then leads you down a deterministic path. And I think of this very much like, imagine that you had a very long list of intelligent contractors who come into your organization who can do whatever you want. You just have to specify it to them. Like at some point you specify like, please do all this intelligent stuff. You have this long list of instructions and things you give to them, but then usually like them just saying yes or no, or risky or not risky, or like, here's how to categorize this thing isn't actually the value. The value is then to take that and then to do 7 more steps. And those 7 more steps, I think, are the workflow. And so I think of it as these little, like if you were to draw a workflow, you typically, you'd have a box in there, which is your AI agent to take the input and then give the output. That's going to become more and more complex. I actually think that some people draw these workflows as these really long, complex things. Like at some point, they're going to get smaller and smaller, but the box that is the AI agent doing work is going to become more and more sophisticated. And that's okay, because I think that's the way that people interact with other people. Like at some point in your whatever group you're in any organization, some team, you go to somebody and you're like, you do this. And it's like one line. It turned out to be like hugely complex, or even that person then kicks off their own workflows. But like, it's a great way to think about things is to say this hard thing to do will be a responsibility of one entity, in this case, an agent, to go do that.
Yeah. It's almost like you're just chaining along milestones where it's like, hey, we want to check back in at this agreed upon point of time, and I want this agreed upon artifact to exist. And how you get to that, that's the agent. It's like, here's all this magic. And then boom, now we're talking about the output of this thing. And then based on that output, we're going to go kick it off again and do another, the next step in the process.
I remember the first time I started to build agents, you start to like realize that they resemble the state diagrams that you have in school. Like at some point you learn these, and then as you go through it, you start to realize that like, wow, like many things that I do or that my company does are representable in these state diagrams. And then there's this like little like kind of moment you have where you're like, whoa, if I just had an arbitrarily complex, huge set of these things, like then like I can do almost anything with the agent because you have the ability to have intelligence. And then of course, your next question is, how am I going to possibly manage that overall? And then you start to build these like layers of this agent calls this agent uses MCP server to go then to this platform. This agent can then all of that be represented in a deterministic workflow. And I think that is how people will start to think of the world going forward. And again, all of it powered by the idea of like, that's not too far from how you think of it today when you have that agent be like kind of the way you deal with a person or a team or whatever. And not to say that agents are going to take over and do those things by themselves, but you will think of them in that way so that it makes it easy for you to figure out what the agent can do for your organization.
Love it, Ben. This is a good place to end it. I could keep going on for hours on this topic. Agents. Hopefully folks enjoyed this conversation. If you're in an organization that has lots of unstructured data and you're bemoaning how it's been hard to do workflows, do automation, all that sort of stuff, you heard it from Ben. Now's an exciting time for you because AI is going to make it a lot easier. Thanks for joining us, Ben.
Thanks for having me on.